requests received by city staff?
Staff has not received any public comment. And I do want to remind commissioners that if you were not currently speaking, please mute your stream. Okay, I believe we have muted the feedback. The feedback. So we have not received any public comment, and we may move on to the next item.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. We are very excited tonight to have the opportunity for a community meeting to review and discuss the draft of the Historic Preservation Plan. We welcome all of you who may be joining us tonight and who would like to provide opportunities for comment and feedback as we think about and envision the Historic Preservation Plan for our city. We are grateful for your support of preservation and heritage in Corpus Christi. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair Nina Dixon-Mendez, Assistant Director and Historic Preservation Officer. Again, we have Steph McDougall from McDougall Preservation, who will be presenting our third community meeting. We had our first meeting back in November to introduce the plan. A lot of work went into it. We had a subsequent meeting in April, and now we have our third community meeting to present the draft plan. So I'll turn it over to Steph and her team.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you, commissioners, Madam Chairwoman, everyone who is joining us. I'd like to begin by acknowledging my team members who contributed to this plan, some of whom are viewing tonight. Kelly Little out of Austin, Madeline Kleitz in Richmond, Virginia, Christina Osborne in Charlottesville, Virginia, Darby Campbell-Furcus in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and Jennifer Beggs in Brooklyn, New York. So thank you to all of them for their contributions, as well as to Brianna Grosicki, who provided the economic development analysis that is in the plan and you'll see here. I'm pleased to share with you tonight an overview of the draft preservation plan that has now been published for comment at cctexas.com/HPP for Historic Preservation Plan. And I'm going to walk you through what's in the plan. We'll talk about opportunities for you to review and comment on this draft, and I'll finish by outlining the rest of the steps for the completion of this project. We will have time at the end for questions and answers. And for those of you not here in person, of course, or joining us on WebEx for the commission, you can submit questions anytime during this presentation through Facebook, YouTube, or email at dsoutreach@cctexas.com. And the lovely Craig Garrison from Development Services will collect all of your questions, and staff or I will answer them at the end. May I have the mouse to click, or would you like to do it? Okay. Yeah. All right, that's all I need. Perfect. Okay. Oh. All right. So for those of you who may not have heard about this project before tonight, I'm just going to summarize it very quickly so that we're all on the same page. This is the third preservation plan undertaken by the city of Corpus Christi in the past 50 years. The first one was adopted in 1974 with an update in 1992. And we are making, you will see, some of the same recommendations that appear in those previous plans. Now, we're not sure why all of those recommendations were not implemented in the past, but today the time is right for Corpus Christi to move forward and join all of the other cities across Texas and the United States that are taking advantage of historic preservation's potential as an economic development and neighborhood stabilization tool. We'll talk more about that in just a bit. So we began this project last fall, as Nina mentioned, and we are on schedule to complete it by the end of September. Here's what we've done so far. We began by reviewing the history of historic preservation in Corpus Christi to understand what has happened in the past and also what has not happened. For example, Corpus Christi has no designated historic districts and only a small number of designated historic landmarks. And that's really unusual for a city that's been doing preservation for this long. We needed to understand the factors that have contributed to this and be able to recommend how you might address those issues. We then conducted telephone interviews with more than 24 stakeholders to learn about what the community values and also what different subsets of the community value. We got a ton of great information. Thank you to all the people who took the time to speak with me on the phone. We used that information to create a community opinion survey, and more than 750 people responded, which is great turnout. Thank you to everyone who took the time to reply, to share your almost 13,000 comments on that survey in both English and Spanish, answering both general and specific questions about what you want to keep around for future generations and how you want the city to be involved in that. Finally, based on all of that input, we prepared this draft preservation plan document and published it this week for the community's review and comment. So what's in it? Well, it's really divided into two main sections. The first half explains what we did and how we did it. That's the introduction, methodology, and the summary of community input. And then the second part introduces a vision for historic preservation in Corpus Christi, 3 overarching goals, and a total of 16 strategies for achieving those goals. And that all comes from the community survey and what you told us you wanted. And for each strategy, we've included an explanation of what we're talking about, so everybody is on the same page, a summary of best practices, specific action items for implementing that particular strategy, and case studies that illustrate how other cities have approached these same opportunities and challenges. So let's look at the vision statement first. It says, and again, this is coming from community input, by 2030, historic preservation in Corpus Christi will support a vibrant, multicultural community enjoyed by residents and visitors alike, with a thriving downtown, diversified economy, updated infrastructure, and equitable investment in both new and legacy neighborhoods. So drilling down from that, we have these 3 goals. First, build city capacity for historic preservation. As I mentioned, we looked at what has happened in the past and what has not happened. There are a couple of things that the city would benefit from that would enable historic preservation to work more effectively. And there are a couple of obstacles that, that need to be addressed also that are in some ways preventing historic preservation from really taking off in Corpus Christi. So we've dealt with those in goal 1. Goal 2, enable community-driven historic preservation. We heard loud and clear that the community wants to be the driving force, wants to be involved, is saying, we don't want the city or expect the city to be the only people out there doing historic preservation. This is our community, we want to do it. Almost 300 people in the community survey shared their contact information and said, I want to be involved. Tell me how I can be personally involved. And so we've looked at how can we make that easier? What can we do to facilitate community involvement and community decision-making and goal setting in preservation. And this preservation plan really is the first step with that, because it is coming out of what the community said they wanted. It's not Nina telling me what she wants, it's you and what you said you want. And then finally, goal 3, support historic preservation as an economic development tool. We know that this works in small towns and large cities across the United States, historic preservation is a fantastic way to spur revitalization of downtowns, rehabilitation of historic buildings, putting vacant buildings back into productive use, nurturing small businesses, which because of their size are often right-sized for historic buildings. And so we are packaging up all kinds of things that have proven to work in other cities in this part of the preservation plan. So let's talk about the strategies that you'll see in the plan. And you'll notice at the bottom, across that blue bar, it will tell you these are the strategies for the first goal, the second goal, the third goal. So strategy number 1, hire a full-time historic preservation officer. When we looked at what has not happened in the past, there have been a lot of these same kinds of goals in past preservation plans, but what the city of Corpus Christi has lacked that other cities have had that I think has made the difference in enabling the city to move forward is one person whose whole job is only focusing on historic preservation. The city of Corpus Christi has a historic preservation officer, Nina Nixon-Mendez, who is doing great work. But in other cities where there's a full-time historic preservation officer who is not responsible for a slew of other things as well, they're able to really devote their time to doing a lot of this work, obviously. And so we're recommending that the first thing that the city should do is make that hire. This is, not something new that I'm springing on, Nina, today. We've had this conversation. But we think that is really a key to carrying forward the recommendations in the plan. When a position opens up in development services and could be filled by someone who's a planner, but also a preservation person. Strategy number 2, obviously, I don't have to read all these to you, but we're recommending that the historic preservation ordinance be updated so that there is a designation for both landmarks and districts where the Landmark Commission's decision, if it says to deny a certificate of appropriateness for changes or relocation or demolition or new construction, is binding. In Houston, we had a very similar situation that you have now. In 1995, the city of Houston adopted its first historic preservation ordinance, and until 2010, the Historic Commission's decisions were basically recommendations because the property owner only had to wait a few months and then they could move forward and do whatever they wanted. And during that 15-year period, we saw a tremendous amount of historic buildings either lost or change in ways that would make them non-contributing to a historic district today. And then in 2010, the city of Houston added this protected option. So they still have historic landmarks that don't have that, that still have the waiting period. They still have historic districts, but they now have protected landmarks where the commission's decision is binding. And so that's completely voluntary. It's not retroactive. So none of the buildings that were historic landmarks and not protected get changed. If the property owner wants to add that protection, they can, but they don't have to. But what it has done is actually spur more historic preservation because people who are investing in rehabbing buildings, restoring buildings, want to know that their investment will be protected. That the next property owner will not just tear down the building or undo the good work that they are hoping to leave as a legacy for the neighborhood and for the next generation. So we're recommending that your preservation ordinance be updated to add that option, not taking anything away, just adding this in addition. Strategy number 3, updating the Landmark Commission bylaws and training requirements. This is primarily aimed at bringing your training requirements into compliance with the Certified Local Government Program. Currently, the CLG program requires annual training. The commission bylaws require that every 2 years. So we're recommending that that be changed to annual to match the CLG program requirements. And we've made some other training suggestions in the plan as well. Our fourth strategy has to do with disasters. Now, you already have a hazard mitigation plan in Corpus Christi, but there are ways to do things specifically for historic buildings. For example, the Texas Windstorm Insurance Association has a windstorm exemption program currently in place in Galveston and Brownsville that allows owners of historic properties that are on the National Register or designated as recorded Texas historic landmarks to be exempted from windstorm certification if they are repairing a home or a business or building after a windstorm. And what that means is that you can fix the windows you have, for example, without having to replace those with windstorm certified window units. So I think there are a couple hundred buildings that have taken advantage of that in Galveston County, including in Lake City where I am. And it's a very simple process. The person fills out a form, the city certifies and sends that to the Texas Historical Commission for final certification, and then they send it on to TWIA. There are also some floodplain regulations already on your books that exempt historic property owners from elevation requirements and things like that. So making sure that people understand what applies to them and how to prepare for that, how to build resilience into their properties, et cetera, is very important. The state of Texas, THC, will be preparing a statewide preservation plan in the next year. And in that, they will be producing a handbook for property owners, owners of historic properties, that is all about disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. So we think there's no reason for the city of Corpus Christi to get out front and make your own plan when the state is going to do that for you. But there are things that can happen here locally to make sure that folks here know what is available to them in terms of options. So finally, the last strategy in this goal for building city capacity is really focused on working with the Convention and Visitors Bureau to develop walking tours of historic areas. With digital smartphone technology today, we have a lot of options for doing that, and we've got so many examples of walking tours that are available both on smartphones, but also where paper copies of the tour can be had by stopping in a visitor center or something like that. And really, this is happening all over the United States. Many, many cities are producing these. There are more apps to do this than I can count. We've provided you with some examples. Preservation Austin just created one and worked with volunteers from the community to create these. So this doesn't require the city to buy a lot of stuff or pay for a lot of stuff. There are options to do this very cost effectively. So recommending that that be something that the Development Services Department works with CVB on to make that happen. Okay, I'm going to try to get through these quickly because I know it's a lot. For goal number 2, the strategy 6, many cities have one web page like the city of Corpus Christi does that has all of the historic preservation information on it. A lot of those are organized slightly differently than Corpus Christi's page. We've made some suggestions for how to make some of that information easier to find for the community. Strategy 7, we feel like community outreach could be improved by standardizing a public engagement process so that the community knows what to expect. You know, we're always going to have 3 meetings. We're, you can sign up for the email. We have, kind of a standard set of things that we're going to do. News outlets that we're going to reach out to, ways that we're going to try to get information out to people. And this is also in preparation for any potential historic districts that might be developed too. For example, in many cities, the planning department will use postcards to send information out to each household in a potential district or one that they're developing design guidelines for, something like that. And for budgeting purposes, as well as just plain old planning purposes, we think it would be great to have that already thought out before you are starting these programs. And then all you have to do is implement this replicable process. And strategy 8, this is super critical. And here's where we get back to those hundreds of people who gave us their contact information and said they wanted to get involved. Many cities really benefit from having a nonprofit partner that the city can work with to do the work of historic preservation. There are a lot of things that the city cannot do, just doesn't have the bandwidth for, or can't get grant funding for, that a local nonprofit 501c3 organization can. And so we're recommending that following the footsteps of Preservation Dallas, Preservation Houston, Preservation Office, or Austin, the San Antonio Conservation Society, the Plano Conservancy for Historic Preservation, and on, that the City of Corpus Christi facilitate and support the creation of a community nonprofit organization that can serve as an effective partner. Maybe more than one, because Docomomo, which is the modern architecture nonprofit and it's worldwide, has local chapters here in Texas. Houston Mod and Mid-Tex Mod are two of those, and there's so much mid-century modern architecture in Corpus Christi that I believe that a mod chapter in Corpus Christi is definitely a possibility. And so we've talked about that in this plan also. So strategy number 9 is very, very important, and that's all about equity. So we know that not all neighborhoods have been treated the same historically, and it's very typical for cities to invest a lot of money in infrastructure, for example, for new neighborhoods, but existing neighborhoods don't always get attention because they're not new. What we want to do is make sure that the city is making a commitment for equitable treatment for all neighborhoods, new and existing, and that residents have the ability and the opportunity to define what that means for them. In some cases, that might mean looking at infrastructure needs. It might be looking at public amenities like parks or swimming pools or playgrounds. But from a historic preservation standpoint, that also means not just focusing on the fancy houses for historic districts. Letting and encouraging neighborhoods that were built during the historic period, which now goes up to 1970, to say we want our neighborhood to be historic, and also to encourage that and work with them. So we've got a whole bunch of information in the plan about that. With city staff, we're recommending that the Landmark Commission take the lead on equitable pursuits and diversity inclusion in historic preservation. And you'll see this happening across the country. City after city is starting to step up and say, we know that most of the landmarks that we have recognized with local designations or National Register nominate or designations are related to or associated with white Anglo people, mostly men. And we're going to do something about that and make sure we're telling the whole story and recognizing the full history of our community. So that's very exciting. I think there's a lot of great stuff to mine here in Corpus Christi. I'm going to be working on a couple of those projects myself. I think that's going to be a really great thing for the city of Corpus Christi, but also it gives you an opportunity to take a leadership position in the state of Texas, because not everybody is doing this yet. I think everybody will be doing it very soon. So you all could step out in front and really lead the way. And then finally, the last one for this goal is to work more closely with the Nueces County Historical Commission to develop a thematic approach to new historic markers that support heritage tourism. For example, there is a great history and tradition of Mexican-American entrepreneurship in Corpus Christi. Tomorrow, I'm going to Tex-Mex Curios, which has been in business since the 1940s in the Six Points area, talking to that family about a historic marker, a National Register nomination, local designations, because that's a modest building, but a big deal historically. And so if you are looking for opportunities for heritage tourism, developing a thematic approach, being able to cast a wide net is a very easy way to do that. And I think it would be helpful to be working with the County Historical Commission, which manages the State Historic Marker Program for the Texas Historical Commission, to identify things that they would be willing to support and potentially could help develop marker nominations for. Okay, last one, or last six. So this is all about economic development. And I'm very excited about this. We have done quite a bit of best practice research in the past. And I want to thank the cities of Belton and Austin, Texas, who have very graciously allowed me to share the work that we did for them with you all in this plan. So thank you, folks, friends. Strategy number 11, promoting historic preservation as an economic development tool. Not everybody thinks about it that way, right? We have a lot of education to do, a lot of opportunities to educate building owners. I look at what Nueces Brewing Company did with their building, which is great. They left so much money on the table, and I've talked to them about it already. But they didn't take advantage of tax credits or, any of those things. They didn't know. So there are a lot of folks out there who I think would benefit from this financially and would be able to use the money they save in the business. So we want to encourage that as much as we can. Strategy 12, you have a vacant building ordinance, which currently is encouraging demolition. It's not working. And I know that it originally was proposed to have a registration component of it. That was deferred. Council said, let's try it without that. We know that the registration requirement works in other cities. The lack of it is not working here. And so we're recommending that that be addressed. And we've got a whole bunch of information in the plan about that specifically. The historic preservation ordinance generally needs to be done first, and then this historic building ordinance. Strategy number 13, this is really where we're getting into the meat of this section. And building block of historic preservation, as you all know, are historic resources surveys. Now, these are not for everybody else who's done a preservation. These are not surveys where somebody stands out in front of the bank with a clipboard or goes and measures your property, with a tripod, in a reflective vest. Historic resources surveys are where we go gather information about something in an area. It could be a subdivision, it could be the whole city, it could be some kind of smaller area. And we figure out what's there and why it's important, what's historic, what's not historic, and then how can we use that information to identify potential landmarks and potential districts. Now, the other kind of listing or designation that we have is called a multiple property submission, and that's kind of like a historic district, except everything isn't in one place in a contiguous area. So you can nominate things to the National Register of Historic Places as individual properties, or if you're nominating multiple properties at once, they can all be together, and that's a historic district, or they can be spread around, and that's a multiple property submission. Now, the benefit to the city investing in the survey and either district or multiple property listings to the National Register is that then those property owners become eligible for federal tax credits, state tax credits. If it's a commercial or at least non-residential building, they don't have to pay sales tax on construction labor. If it is an amusement services provider, which you want more entertainment downtown, they don't have to collect sales tax on amusement services. And that gives you a qualifying criteria for local tax incentives. And it also, like we mentioned before, qualifies them for things like the windstorm exemption, so that people don't have to replace their historic windows. There's so many things that happen when a property is on the National Register. And importantly, the National Register does not restrict property owners at all. It's not a regulation, it's recognition only. So it just has so much upside potential. And what we have seen in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is very similar to Corpus, it is awash in mid-century modern architecture. The city of Tulsa made an investment in a historic resources survey. It was less than $150,000 that they paid, and that has resulted in almost $300 million in private investment to rehabilitate buildings in their downtown area. So we know that this works, but making that investment in the Historic Resources Survey to begin with is the first step. And so we're recommending that the city make that investment to enable the use of these tax incentives by private property owners. Okay, so that's all the big state federal stuff that you can get. But we're also recommending that deal stack include local tax incentives. And there are a whole lot of ways that you can go about doing this. There are tax exemptions, which say you don't have to pay some percentage of the tax that's due. And there are tax abatements, which says we're going to exempt some portion of the value of your property from taxes. There are all kinds of different ways to get at this. We've included a lot of information in the plan to consider about those options. And the thing that we've also included is a recommendation that if you want those financial incentives, you have to agree to some kind of city oversight for your property. And that's what you all said you wanted in the community opinion survey. The community said if people are going to get money from the city, our taxpayer money, they have to be willing to play by some rules that are reasonable and explained in advance and applied fairly and consistently. That's what happens in cities all over the country and could happen here too in Corpus. Finally, strategy 15, a different approach to this, which is in addition, is to develop a facade improvement program outside TERS number 3. Now, the Downtown Management District already has a facade improvement program in TERS number 3, but that is limited, and there are plenty of other commercial buildings outside that TERS that would benefit from a facade improvement program and some either low interest loans or reimbursement grants or something like that. And the city could fund that. The Downtown Management District can manage that also as a fee for service. Alyssa Barrera Mason at the DMV is doing a great job. And I would take advantage of that experience and expertise that she and her team have to expand the facade improvement program. And then finally, I know you've been waiting for the list of which select projects we think the city should support and invest in specifically. Now, what we heard from the community in the survey was that there are things that have happened in Corpus Christi over the past, 20 years or whatever, that have made you feel like historic preservation is not going to work here. The old Nueces County Courthouse is one of them. And I know that that's, it's not the city's building, it belongs to the county. They're working on it, but we've heard that you all think it's an eyesore, that it's a black eye, that something needs to be done. We agree. And we think the city is going to have to be a part of that. I know the county owns it. We think the city is going to have to do something to be a partner in that effort. The second building that we heard many people want the city to get involved in is the Ritz Theater. They have recently received a nearly $250 million grant from the Texas Historical Commission for Harvey repairs. I know they're going to be working on a structural assessment of the roof and any roof repairs, and then, potentially other building systems. And that building has the ability to be a catalyst for an entertainment district in that area. We are already seeing bars and restaurants around there, bus, goldfish, etc. That could really drive a lot of economic development in that area. And we know that happens because the League of Historic American Theaters publishes data about how many jobs, how much tax improvements, how much sales tax, how much economic development increases happen from fixing up a historic theater. So we're recommending that the city make a commitment to partner in those projects and demonstrate that preservation can work. It's going to take some vision, obviously, but we think that's totally possible. And so we're recommending that that in some way the city would participate in those two projects. Okay, so we talked about having action items in this. So we've got the vision, the goals, the strategies, and then within the strategies for each strategy, we've got action items listed, and you can see some examples here where we're saying very specifically what we think you need to do to make this happen. Now, this isn't a prescriptive, you must do it. These are things that we are recommending that we think would be beneficial. We also have not specified doing these in a particular order, although we have indicated if there are things that you should do before you do other things, we've got those listed too for each of the strategies. Okay, and then here's an example of one of the case studies that we have in the plan. We've got a lot of different case studies from all over the country, but we have tried to include those primarily from Texas. And then here's how this is going to work going forward. So we've published the draft plan. The public comment period is not super long. We've found that really people give us most of their comments in the first couple weeks, if they're going to. There aren't usually a lot of stragglers. On July 2nd, we're going to close the public comment period. You can still comment after that, but we'd like for you to get your comments in before the 4th of July holiday, please. And again, we'll have the contact information at the end of this to show you how to do that. On July 22nd, I'm going to see you all again. We'll have a public hearing on this. Everyone will have a chance to speak out about what you think about the plan, comments, suggestions, feedback, complaints, input. We want to hear it all. Please participate. And then again, on August 4th, we'll be at the Planning Commission for a public hearing, and then in September, going to City Council. We are expecting that there will be 2 City Council meetings. The first reading and discussion will happen, and then there will be a second reading and vote on adopting the plan. Now, how do you get your comments in about the plan? Well, Craig Garrison is your guy. He is going to collect them and send them on to Nina and I. If you want to call him, you can reach him here at 361-826-3828. But we prefer to get your comments in writing in your own words. It's much more helpful for us to get them that way, so we know that we are getting exactly what you wanted to convey. If you want to send those in via email, you can do that at DS Outreach for Development Services Outreach, dsOutreach@cctexas.com, or you can send an mail, letter in the mail to Post Office Box 9277, Corpus Christi 78469, and keep track of the news and other events going on at www.cctexas.com/HPP, the webpage for this project. And that is my presentation, and I will be happy to take comments.
Thank you so much, Steph. We do have a few comments coming in from Facebook. And the first question I do believe you just answered, which is how can residents get involved? But if you want to elaborate.
Yeah, so I know that this plan is really long, it's 140 pages. What I would suggest is if you don't want to read all that, just look at the strategies. The first part is really, I think, mostly to kind of set the stage and let you know how we got to this point. But you can just read the strategies, and if they're long, just skip to the action items. But we want to know what you think, and specifically, we would really like to know, do you agree with these things? Are there some of these that you think should be top priorities? And if you would like to get involved in any of these potential projects, we'd love to know that too. So those would be the 3 things that I hope you'll share with us during this part of the process. And of course, please feel free to speak at the public hearings that we have coming up at the 2 commission meetings and then the 2 council meetings. What else?
Thank you, Steph. Yeah, we have a next question, and it's what would you imagine city participation in the RITS project look like? Are there other economic impact projects like that that were a nonprofit with city support help, kind of a mixture?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think for both the Ritz and the old courthouse, my feeling, and I can't say too much about this, but I work with a lot of folks who develop these kinds of projects, either hospitality projects or entertainment projects. And I've talked to them about both of these buildings and said, what do you think? And what they both said is, in order for a developer to make an investment in this, they would probably need to have some kind of subsidized, skin in the game investment by the city or county. But importantly, the area around those buildings would need some attention. So streetscape improvements, having more businesses open. For example, around the courthouse, there's really not a lot there. So if you wanted to turn it into, for example, a hotel property, what would guests do when they walked out of that door? Are there, could there be restaurants around there? Could you build some infrastructure, an ecosystem around that building. And I think what I'm hearing from developers is that's what we would need to have before we would make that kind of investment. Tell us how the city is going to participate in that as a partner. And not just, there are a lot of ways that could happen. But certainly those streetscape improvements and spurring additional economic retail dining activity in that area for both of those projects, I think is going to be really important.
Perfect. Thank you. We currently don't have any more questions, but we do have a few comments on Facebook. One of them says, yes to tax incentives. And the other one is strategy 13, definitely. So.
Thanks, everybody. I'm just going to say thank you in advance for, number one, listening to my super long presentation, but also for reading the plan. I hope that you will all be able to get something out of it and make comments about it. We want to hear from everybody.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments or questions from any of the landmark commissioners?
Commissioner Dees, talking about the nonprofit, much like we have a nonprofit we work with in the Old Baby Cemetery. It's a good example right there with the Friends of the Old Baby Cemetery. And I think that multiple nonprofits would be very beneficial to what we're trying to accomplish here. So I think we're headed the right direction.
Agreed.
Any further comments or questions?
We have one more comment on Facebook that says the plan is looking great so far.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the distillation and the presentation of the plan. I know we're all very excited and eager to take a look at it. Again, thank you to those of you who are joining us from other County Historical Commission, Historical Society, members of the public. We are very excited to see this initial presentation, which sort of catalyzes and helps us to quantify the numbers of people in Corpus Christi and its surrounding areas who are interested in historic preservation and the heritage of our city, and eager to find ways to engage that enthusiasm as we continue to move forward. It's very exciting to know that such a large percentage of people participated in the survey. Over 750 people that's a large percentage of our population. So thank you so much, Steph, to you and your team for facilitating that and for the enthusiasm and inspiration it gives us, knowing that there's such a large cohort of people who are all eager and interested in the same direction and progress, recognizing our heritage and using that to further build our community, both for us as residents and to welcome visitors from outside. Thank you so much. Moving on, do we have a historic preservation officer's report?
Yes, Madam Chair, very brief report for our next next Landmark Commission meeting. We will probably be having it in the chambers. We do have, I believe, the chambers reserved for our regular meeting date. And that'll be the day that we'll be hosting our public hearing. So we'll be looking at the times, if we want to go with our regular time or if we want to have an evening time. And so we'll be, emailing the commissioners to get their opinion on that. So that is all I have to report. I'm very excited that we'll be, having our public hearing regarding our preservation plan update. And of course, we want to continue to dialogue with our stakeholders and all our individuals who signed on to participate in the preservation plan. We'll be sending another round of emails out to folks to encourage their input in the draft plan. And of course, we look forward to receiving the comments on the draft plan from the commissioners as well. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much, and thank you. We want to recognize you and the city staff for your work in facilitating that historic preservation plan as well. Are there any future agenda items?
Mr. Dees, remind Craig that when we met with a mayor here a while back to receive our certificate, I guess it was, she had asked about the old city bakery and if maybe we could look into some kind of designation for that building. I believe it was on Comanche or La Pan.
Yes, Chair. I'm going to let Craig address that. He's had an opportunity to work with the business owners. Craig?
Thank you, Commissioner Dees. Yes, staff, myself, and Sandra were able to meet with the owners of City Bakery. It's on the west side, I believe, on 17th Street. And we were able to have about a 30 to 45-minute discussion about the potential designation of City Bakery as a local landmark. They are very excited by the potential. They are open to a landmark designation. So it is now up to staff to kind of move the designation through the process. And currently myself and Nina are working on this recommendation of designation to, I believe, City Council. We are also looking for, I believe, Landmark Commission's kind of blessing, if you will. So it does seem like it'd be the first designation in about a decade for a local designation. So once we get the process started.
And if I could add, if the council introduces a resolution regarding the designation process, then the zoning fee could be waived for that. Because if you recall, our designation is through a zoning process. So we want to continue to, conduct research on the business and work with our mayor's office on that.
Well, I'd just like to say we've had council people in the past that supported our efforts, but we've got a mayor that's very interested in what we're doing. And the fact that we're moving into the 21st century with historic preservation, we've got some very good people like Nina and Craig on board. And I think we're finally going to actually put some teeth in what this Landmark Commission is all about. So I'm quite proud to be part of this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other future agenda items that anybody would like to bring forward at this time? Okay, well, with that, thank you all very much. Thank you, commissioners, for your continued support. I will look forward to digging into the draft of the historic preservation plan in detail so that we can talk in depth about that at our next meeting. I will look forward to public comment at that time as well. May I ask if anybody would bring forward a motion for adjournment?
I, Roslyn, make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
This is Commissioner Fontenot. I second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank y'all.
Thank
Nice
you.
meeting
Thanks,
some of you
everyone.
folks finally.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.